Good morning. It is Tuesday, May the 11th, and this is The Drill. And I want to welcome all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. My name's Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today. So today on the menu we have the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, then the Pledge of Allegiance. After that, it's going to be a segment, at least one segment, from the book Live Not by Lies by Rod Dreher, and then various thoughts on various topics. All that when I come back. Thank you. In my power you will bind and cast out all desert spirits. Because you are my child and have committed your life to me, I have given you the power to bind and cast out the desert spirits, who have taken authority in the spiritually dry desert lands, in the hearts of those who live in disobedience to me. No longer will the desert spirits make their homes in your life or possess the dark regions of your heart to raise their young. I've given you authority and power to cast out these evil desert spirits. The spiritual desert that once possessed you will be gone, and I will bring forth the blessings of my own habitation within your spirit. Declaration. I speak to every desert spirit in my life or ministry in the name of Jesus. I bind and cast out any desert spirit sent against my life. I bind and cast out every spirit of the desert owl, the desert fox, the desert dragon, the desert hyena, and the desert vulture in the name of Jesus. I will not dwell in the wilderness, but in a fruitful land. Amen. And let's see. Now, time for the Pledge of Allegiance. So now I'm going to read at least one section from Live Not by Lies, and this section is called Progress as Religion. Yesterday I was reading from a section that was called Modernity is Progress, and that progress has become basically what is his, to sum it up, that section is that progress is a cult. And that everybody, the left and the right, expects to make progress, and they make their socio-political decisions accordingly. For classical liberal devotees of the myth of progress, the ideal society is one in which everyone has equal freedom of choice. For radicals, it is one in which everyone is living with equality of outcome. Belief that one's circumstances can be improved by collective human effort, though, is a powerful political motivator. It is difficult to see this from the perspective of the 21st century, but to believe that poverty, sickness, and oppression are not destined to be one's fate was a revolutionary concept in human history. It gave people whose ancestors had scarcely known anything but want and suffering hope for the future. Marx likened religion to a drug because it blunted the pain of life for the masses, and in his view, took away from them the consciousness that they had the power to overturn the social order that immiserated them. Unlike progressives in the classical liberal tradition, Marx and his fellow radicals promised that radical politics, harnessing the power of science and technology, really could establish heaven on earth. They were atheists who believed that man could become like a god. As a perversion of religion, progress as an ideology speaks appealingly to hungry human hearts. As Milhaud and other dissidents testify, communism answered an essentially religious longing in the souls of restless young intellectuals. Progressivism in all of its forms appeal to the same desire in intelligent young people today, both secular and those within churches who are alienated from authoritative ecclesial traditions. This is why Christians today must understand that fundamentally they aren't resisting a different politics, but rather what is effectively a rival religion. This is how it was for young Russians of the late 19th century who embraced Marxism with the fervor of religious converts. It gave its devotees a narrative that helped them to understand why things are the way they are and what they, as Marxists, should do to bring about a more just world. It was an optimistic philosophy, one that promised relief and bounty for all the peoples of the world. To create utopia, Marxists first had to rout Christianity, which they saw as a false religion that sanctified the ruling class and kept the poor superstitious and easy to control. The Russian radicals also hated the so-called Philistines, their word for the deplorable people who live out their daily lives without thinking or of anything higher or greater. The radical intelligentsia regarded the Philistines as their complete opposites, the rough and beastly Goliaths to their clever Davids. They hated the Philistines with all-consuming intensity, no doubt partly because so many of them had come from such families. The comfortable Philistines were not the kind of people prepared to suffer and die for their beliefs. The Bolsheviks were. The Tsarist government sent many of their leaders into Siberian exile, which did not break them, but made them stronger. Exile stood for suffering, intimacy, and the sublime immensity of the heavenly depths. It offered a perfect metaphor for both what was wrong with the world of lies and what was central to the promise of socialism. To be a revolutionary in those days was to share a sense of purpose, of community of hope, and an electrifying bond of contempt, a contempt we see in the social justice movement today toward anyone who differs from its religious claims. Both the Christian faith and totalitarianism share an ultimate concern with the inner man. Christianity and communism, which is to say the most radical form of progressivism, are best understood as competing religions. Despite the self-delusions of theologically progressive Christians, so too are Christianity and the easygoing nihilism that characterizes progressivism in our post-Christian era. And so, what was he saying here? Competing religions. No, it's the cult. It is a religion versus a cult. Christianity is a religion. Muslim is a religion. Judaism is a religion. Anything else is really a cult. Mormonism is a cult. Okay, and what you got on the left is a cult, not a religion. I'm not going to elevate what the left does to the status of a religion. It just simply isn't. It is simply a cult, and it's wrong. So, let's see, we're going to do here this, and, and when I come back, we're going to have, I'm going to have some thoughts on the hypocrisy of AOC, the hypocrisy of old Joe, self-consciousness, Democrat schools, good faith elections, and argument is epistemology. All that when I come back. On Instagram, there was a post from the Atlas Society, which is an Ayn Rand or offshoot, and they showed a picture of AOC on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine. They were complaining that she was, or just it wasn't even a complaint. No, I'll stick with complaint. They were complaining that she was wearing a $14,000 dress on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine. Now, assuming that all of that is true, then you got three things here. First of all, the Atlas Society is being neutral about it, just stating the facts and letting you decide. Wrong, 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 wrong. Judge, condemn where necessary. Be prepared to admit that you're wrong if it turns out you're wrong, but judge. So in this particular case, she's a hypocrite. And that's the way you want to announce to the world. AOC is a hypocrite. She claims to be an idealist and a socialist. And here she is pimping about on the cover of Vanity Fair, sporting $14,000 dresses. Then the other thing is that, and say that she's wrong, she's a hypocrite about it. Also, as a side note, be aware that your friends are going to try and come back at you, and they're going to try and something to get you to prove a negative. Usually in this case, they're going to say, AOC, you hate AOC because she's a woman. She's a woman in power. So that's what you're all about. And so what your response should be is to come back and say, You support hypocrisy. You're as big of a hypocrite as she is. Now you're putting it back on them to prove a negative. Prove that they're not a hypocrite. And that's the way you get out of that little jam. The other thing about this is take solace. Be happy in knowing that this is the state of our enemies. Okay? That they're people with clay feet. You look at the BLM CEO, who's got how many houses now? 4 houses, $1 million apiece. One of them in Beverly Hills. And then now we've got AOC pimping about in her $14,000 dress. These people don't want change. They're not people who are really down for the struggle. They're grifters. They're con artists. They want to use a movement for their own benefit. Joe Biden yesterday declared that nobody from India was going to be able to fly to the United States. They were persona non grata, so to speak. Now, he's doing exactly the same thing to a different country, but to exactly the same thing that Donald Trump did in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the communist flu, if you will, back in March of last year. The only difference, like I said, is that instead of doing it to China, he's doing it to India. Now, the problem here for Joe is that Joe went ahead and called Donald Trump all kinds of nasty names, right? So now here's old Joe, boldly. He doesn't come out and say, "Oh, but by the way, folks, I'm changing my mind here. You know, yes, I was criticizing Donald Trump, but I was wrong. I jumped the gun. I was premature. Whatever. I've changed my mind, and going ahead and restricting flights from countries that have high COVID rates is the thing to do after all." That's what he should do, but he doesn't do that. Instead, what he does is he simply ignores it. And it's a power move. And it's a power move because nobody can force him to remember it. Okay, nobody can force him to remember that Donald Trump did the same thing he's doing now and was criticized by him for it. If he can't be forced to recognize hypocrisy, he doesn't have to account for it. He can't be held accountable. That's his. And if he's going to ignore the hypocrisy, then what does anyone else? What can anyone else do about it? How can you win here? And that's a really good question, something I intend to think about. But how do you win when somebody refuses to acknowledge reality? The importance, again, of definition. So what is the definition of a human being, of an individual human? It used to be said that it was what it is that made a human being a human being was the ability to reason. That has been cast into doubt because there has been demonstrations of other mammals that have demonstrated the ability to reason in primitive ways, but that they have the ability to reason. A person that I talked to years ago was saying that there's two things that separate human beings from animals, or let's just say other mammals, and that is the number one, cumulative knowledge. That not only do we have knowledge, but we can use that knowledge and build on it. We're foundational creatures. We can use 2 + 2 = 4 to then get into, we can use addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and from there get into algebra, trigonometry, calculus, etc. And that is something that no other mammals are able to do. And perhaps even more importantly, that human beings are self-conscious and are the only animal, period, that is self-conscious. And what's important about that is that the left constantly wants us to be compared to animals. One of the areas where we see this is migration, where the left wants everybody to use the word migrants when they're talking about people that are crossing the borders illegally instead of immigrant. And the difference is that animals migrate, human beings immigrate and emigrate. They do other things like trying to demonstrate how it is that elephants can paint. They can do artwork, and also demonstrating, re-emphasizing the idea that certain other mammals, ape-like animals that can reason rudimentarily. We also see things on YouTube where they claim that animals have emotions, that cats are sad and are crying because they feel their owner's pain, and this is proof of how close cats are to human beings in terms of being human or whatever. So why all of this stuff? Why would the left give a damn about making animals seem demoting human beings down to the level of other mammals? And the reason is simple, because is property, ultimately. Property and property rights. It works like this, that human beings are self-conscious, and because they are self-conscious, they have a reasonable, or in some cases unreasonable, but a reasonable expectation. Notice I didn't say right, but an expectation of privacy. It is the expectation of privacy that leads human beings to seek out property, whether it is a tent for a bum or a multi-room mansion for somebody like Donald Trump. But private property that they control, where they can control access, and the whole point of that is, again, because of a reasonable expectation of privacy. So if the left figures psychologically, if they can convince people or get in their psyche and brainwash them into believing that human beings are really no different than other animals, then it is much easier to disabuse people of the notion that they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. No expectation of privacy, no property rights, hence socialism. For instance, I've said that should we continue going in this direction, then you're going to get to a point where you are going to be in your house. Maybe you're going to have the door open because, again, you don't have any reasonable expectation of privacy. Maybe not even locks on the door. And not because it's safe, but because, again, you don't have any reasonable expectation of privacy. And the state, people from the state are going to just walk right in. Hi, how are you? So we notice you have this 3-bedroom, 2-bath house here. We also know that your children are away at college. So we know that you have 2 extra bedrooms open in this house. And right now they're just going to waste. So we got 2 bums that we brought with us because we want to get them off the street. So we're going to leave them here with you, and they're going to go ahead and live here indefinitely, at least until your children come back from college. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, and walk out. And you aren't going to do anything about it because you've been brainwashed and intellectually disarmed. Because at this point you have no basis on which to object. Not me, of course, because I know what I'm doing. That's one of the reasons I'm the only true conservative in the United States today. So, but you've been disarmed, so you're going to stand there with your mouths open knowing something's wrong here. Something's wrong here, but you're powerless, intellectually, psychologically powerless to do anything about it. So, and that's why you're going to live your lives in totality as perpetual victims, perpetual voluntary, in a manner of speaking, victims to or of the state. The state will simply do what it sees fit with you, with your property, anytime it wants, because it knows it will get no resistance. Because again, you will no longer have the intellectual or psychological capability or capacity for resistance. So the way we stop this is at the bottom. You stop any foundational structure by, when you see them starting to pour the foundation, you F it up in some way, shape, or form. In this particular case, you don't go for this crap where people are trying to claim that human beings are exactly like animals. You don't use the word migrant. They might, everybody else might, but you have the power to say, nope, I don't know what you're talking about. I understand immigration and emigration, but I don't know what the hell you're talking about when you say migration. So you can do that and at least save yourself the trouble. Because like I said, in the future, in that future scenario, they're not coming to me because they know better. They know I'm going to put up an argument. And they're not going to bother to argue or fight with me because they don't need to. Because all my neighbors have been brainwashed. Okay? So save yourself trouble in the future of having the state just presume to use your property or presume to use you. Nip this stuff in the bud. Understand that migration is a way of acquainting us with animals and trying to disabuse us of the notion that we have any reasonable expectation of privacy. I'm thinking about now is about Democrats and Republicans, and I was thinking about how there's a lot of Democrats, i.e. liberals, which is basically just a cover name for socialist communist, but that are heavy in certain places, industries, if you will. So one of them is teaching that I was thinking about. And I was thinking about maybe that there's going to come a time in the near future in which we're going to have to do a political litmus test, and parents are going to have to say, if you're a liberal, don't bother to apply for a teaching job because we're not going to accept you. And that's one of the things maybe you need to do when you go into a school is go and say, ask how many liberals, how many Democrats do you have in this school? That are teaching in teaching positions. Ask the superintendent or the headmaster or the principal or whomever, are you a Democrat? So anyways, but that, of course, that brings we usually don't have in the United States of America, or haven't had political litmus tests for jobs. You don't go to a job and they say, okay, well, are you Republican or are you a Democrat? And if you're, you get excluded if you're one or the other. But the reason that hasn't happened is because up until recently, both parties had something in common. Both parties were fundamentally patriotic. That's why I've always said it is possible for a conservative to be a Democrat. It's possible. Back in the 60s, there were conservative Democrats. There aren't any more now, but it was possible then. So, but the thing that made the change, the difference is that the left doesn't act in good faith anymore. The left is, because patriotism is the test. If we're both patriotic, Democrats and Republicans, and we both want what is best for the country, we just differ in terms of what we think is best for the country, that's fine. Then we are opponents, political opponents. But and I can feel comfortable even if I lose the election, so to speak. If I'm a voter and I voted straight Republican ticket, let's say, and there's some areas in which Democrats have won, I can still feel okay thinking, well, I'm not a big fan of what they're going to want to try to do, but I still feel that the country is safe, right? Because we're all interested in what's best for the country. I know that they're not going to go out and try to destroy the country. Not so today. Not so today. They've gone from being a political opponent to an enemy. So, that may be the way it's going to have to go. You're going to have to maybe dig a little bit, find out which schools are more heavily Democrat than others. You may have to at least start asking the questions. Maybe making the statements, hey, I'm not going to put up with any left-wing socialist nonsense here. If you start trying to teach my kids 2 + 2 = 5, we're done. I'm out of here. But ask the principal, are you a Democrat? Maybe that's what it's going to happen in the future, because there's no way that socialism is going to take over. The best that the socialists can hope for is to have a divided society in which basically you have, for example, Democrat schools, Republican schools. Okay, so Democrats go to one school, Republicans go to another. So it will be a different type of diversity than they had imagined. Okay, no revolution, no paradise, just divided schools. And all the Democrats can go out and learn that 2 + 2 = 5, or 2 + 2 = whatever you want it to equal, and the Republicans will learn the truth, and we'll see how things turn out. I caught a clip of a personality on MSNBC bemoaning the fact that, or alleged fact that the democracy in the United States is gone, or being threatened. They always say that, threatened. They never really come out and say it's gone, but they say it's being threatened, and that she says being threatened, and the way she defined things is that a democracy in America is a place where there's a two-party system, and that one party wins, one loses, and that the loser goes ahead and goes away and comes back to fight another day. And but because that there's movements afoot to try to shore up our election system to make sure that we don't get cheated again, then of course that's a threat to democracy. If the Democrat Party is seen to be cheating and whatnot, and there's more and more evidence that the Democrat Party is cheating, then that's a threat to our democracy. But of course it isn't. What was I thinking about here? So what she's forgetting here is that her analysis is subject to the good faith test. Are both parties operating in good faith, the Republicans and the Democrats? As long as they're operating in good faith, both parties want what's best for the country, then it's no big deal. That's the way it used to be in this country, is everybody wanted what was best for this country, so that if I as a Republican lose, and then I voted all, let's say, straight Republican ticket, and some Democrats win, I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to run out and scream cheater, because it's not that big. Even if they did cheat, so what? The Democrats want what's best for this country. The Republicans want what's best for this country. Okay, maybe the Democrats are a little overambitious. They want their way a little bit too much. But things will even out in the end. And if you have a few Democrats in power, or if they're running things for a while, so what? They still want what's best for this country. But now what's going on is that we have a Democrat Party that is not interested in what's best for the United States, is clearly treasonous in its outlook and its behavior. And that's the difference. I can't just stand idly by and shrug my shoulders and say, well, okay, maybe they cheated, we'll get them next time. Not if they're going to go ahead and do the things that they're planning to do, which is basically commit treason, but do it under color of authority. So that's sums it up, is that too bad for these pundits on the left that are whining and crying about the lack of, and what they're really crying about is that they're not able to get their way. They're not necessarily going to be able to get their way and destroy the country, the greatest country on the face of the earth, and get away with destroying paradise. Because I still say the United States of America is paradise. And I say self-evidently so. If you listen carefully, you'll notice that people really avoid arguments, that you'll notice that you get into fewer arguments today. For those of you that are my age, so that to remember back in the days in which people used to argue, and so that there's fewer and fewer arguments, and now what there is really a tax on epistemology or a tax on knowledge. So if you come out and say, yes, something you're firm about it, yes, this is the way it is, the other person is unlikely to say, no, that's not right, it's a different way. What you usually get is, you don't know that. And kind of changing the subject, but they're attacking, again, knowledge and your certainty of knowledge. Of course, they cannot prove that, nor will they try. They will just try to continue to duck and dodge and whatnot. But what they're doing is avoiding the argument and avoiding epistemology, certainty of knowledge. Argument is epistemology, because argument is always about what it is that we know. And so without any arguments about what it is that we know, then where there is no epistemology. And in schools and universities, there are no courses anymore on epistemology. There's only, it's blended into metaphysics. So if you're majoring in philosophy, you'll get a course in metaphysics, which will have in it lessons on epistemology. And then you'll move on to ethics and aesthetics. So instead of having the four main categories of philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics, you only have three. So, and then how does that manifest itself in real life? That you no longer have any arguments with people. And it's important to argue. We need to argue because we need to know. If we don't know, if we can't know, then there's no point. There's no happiness to be had. The whole notion of trying to find happiness is ridiculous, becomes ridiculous. But it's not. We can and we do know. We make errors, we make our mistakes, but that's why we have arguments, and is to discover those errors, correct them, so that we can have a happy life. Now, what can you do about it? Well, one of the things that you can do is insist. Very often, when you catch somebody saying something that's wrong, and as a true conservative, you should point that out. You're wrong. And if they try to, sometimes what they'll even do is they just won't say anything. If it's obvious that they're wrong, instead of admitting, okay, yeah, you're right, which is the way we used to handle things. We'd have arguments, and then whoever was able to prove their case, the other person would say, you're right, I was wrong, my mistake. Okay? And you're doing it as much because you learned something as assuaging or massaging the ego of the other person. But you end up learning something. Benefits both people is the point. Right is right. And again, you can't find your way to a happy life unless you're willing to acknowledge reality. You're willing to acknowledge that some things are right, some things are wrong, and be able to distinguish between the two. But in any case, like I said, so when you come back and you have somebody that's wrong and they don't want to admit they're wrong, you have to be firm about it. If you have to, you tell them, look, you and I are not going to talk again until you're able to and willing to and will admit that you are wrong. So, get people to admit that they're wrong. And eventually, they'll do it. The vast majority of people, again, are useful idiots. They only do what they do because they hear and see other people do it. Okay, they watch somebody on television who acts in a certain way. They don't see any consequences for that behavior, so they think it works. Okay, and that's one of the problems with our society also writ large, is that we judge things based on the way they work. And I mean our society, the United States of America. Pragmatism is supposed to be the American philosophy, and it's not. All it is immorality dressed up like the dog's dinner. Might makes right, and the ends justify the means. And that's crap. It's not about what works. It's about what's right and wrong. Acknowledging the right and getting rid of what's wrong. But like I said, what we can do as true conservatives is make sure that when we are involved in conversations, that the person that is wrong admits to it. Okay, and again, if it comes down to it, you tell them I'm not going to, you cut off conversation with them. The next time they come back to say, excuse me, we're not going to talk about anything else, especially with your kids. Okay, and this is one of the things, the stunts little children used to pull. Now adults do it, because there's a lot of adults who see children as role models. It's backwards, it's atavistic, and ridiculous, but they do. In any case, when we were kids, we used to do that too, see what we can get away with. Why do I have to be right? Why do I have to have evidence and proof and whatnot? And we always had parents or adults around us that would make sure we understood, that would hold us accountable. And that's the ultimate accountability, is admitting that you're wrong. And so that's what you can do about it. So again, not allowing, get into an argument with somebody, look to get into an argument, get the conversation, point the conversation into a yes, no, right or wrong direction, and then make the argument. I'm right, you're wrong, and make your point. And if they refuse to admit that they're wrong, hold them accountable. We aren't going to discuss, because if you won't admit that you're wrong, then what you're doing is you're damaging your own integrity. Without integrity, you have no credibility. Without credibility, you will have no influence. Thank you. That brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And remember to be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win. So see you next time.